Good break? Hopefully you all got to meet one another and stuff. Try to figure out why some of you remembered The Lion King and others didn't. It's kind of amazing. But my argument would be that The Lion King is a narrative. Plus it's also a visual narrative. But I suspect that when you remember other stories that are not movies, but that you've read maybe, or things that have happened, you remember them because of their narrative format. So if you remember, say, a fishing trip, and you remember driving down to the shore, and you remember eating breakfast at the restaurant, you remember getting out onto the ship, and then going out, with all the men, and, fishing, no women, sorry, and then, catching all the flounder, and everybody all complaining because, well, there's no fish. There always used to be fish. Now there isn't any fish. And you're thinking to yourself, that's because you've been fishing here for years? How could there be still fish? And then you come back, and then you get in the car, and you're sleepy, and you wake up, and you're home because you're just a kid, right? Remember the whole narrative, so I remember all the parts. One thing leads to another. Remember, the problem with the Ten Commandments is it isn't a narrative, right? It's technical information. If you think about trying to remember technical information like geometry courses and things of that sort, unless it's in a narrative format, that doesn't seem native to our intelligence. You have to remember it by using repetition, rote learning, right? So you have to remember it over and over again in order for you to remember it. But if it's a story, everything connects. So as soon as you hear one part of it, when does Dorothy click her heels together in the movie?
At the end.
At the very end, right? So narrative placement. So in a sense, and traditional knowledge was passed on by narratives, by stories. They might not have had a middle and an end and so on, but they were still, went out hunting, paddling, looking around, looking, right? And we find an animal, so we're moving quicker, then we get out, the bow or the whatever, and, kill the animal, and we get the animal, and we bring the animal back. Whole story, right? It might not be Harry Potter, where you're going through the monomyth. How many of you are familiar with the concept of the monomyth? Anybody? Only one person? Monomyth is pretty interesting.
Sounds familiar, but I think so.
So I believe the concept of the monomyth is thanks to Joseph Campbell, so Campbell. This is the hero's journey. So the hero he wrote a book called, Joseph Campbell wrote a book called A Hero of a Thousand Faces. And basically it's like a telephone book of all the major narratives, worldwide narratives that are famous. And they're all heroic narratives, so what he did was he basically gathered the data from all these different narratives and highlighted which ones overlapped, and eventually got to the point where he had this basic pattern, that if you wanted a successful narrative, you had to have these elements. The more of these elements you had in it, the more successful it would be, the more people would like it, right? By the way, one of Joseph Campbell's students was a guy named George Lucas.
No way.
Yes, and George Lucas, of course, decided, well, I'll make a movie following this, and he made the first movie, Star Wars.
Number 4.
And movies have never gone back, right? Basically, any movie you look at anymore, I think you can easily plug into the monomyth. And what scariest thing, though, is Beverly Hillbillies Chihuahua, or not Beverly Hillbilly, Beverly Hills Chihuahua, right? Beverly Hills Chihuahua, right? Because if you look at the movie, right? Beverly Hills Chihuahua. Hold your tacos. Have you ever seen this, Beverly Hills?
Home of the rich and famous.
I'll get you anything you want. Yes, I will. No, not you, Patrick.
Where no one is more pampered and privileged than the Beverly Hills Chihuahuas.
It's not easy to find a mate with papers. Hey, talk to the paw.
But Poppy is the one dog who's his own man.
Corazon,
Oh,
lovely.
Who is that hungry chihuahua?
Ever need someone to lick inside your ears? I would be most honored.
Woof.
Notice he speaks English with a Spanish accent.
You take good care of her.
He's just a bilingual Chihuahua.
Oh, no, she didn't.
But everything is about to go south.
We're going on a trip. Mexico!
Hello.
hola and adios.
Hold your tacos.
Now,
Chloe's in trouble. I mean, come on, fool, let's go.
the most pampered dog in Beverly Hills is 1,000 miles from home.
Don't you speak any Spanish?
Why would I speak Spanish?
Hello, you're Chihuahua, mija.
And this rebel and his crew
Say hello to my little friends.
are on a mission
Let's go get Chloe.
that's off the leash.
I'm gonna kick some tail.
Don't eat me, I got a wife and 300 kids to feed.
Nice legs. For the love of a banana.
Let's get out of here.
Walt Disney Pictures presents
I could use a little help.
the greatest Chihuahua movie
Oh, yeah.
of all time.
Hey, homie. I have never had my teeth brushed before. It's minty.
Beverly Hills Chihuahua.
Hi, Deb. I want to talk to Chloe. Would you put her on? Hi, honey.
Chihuahua.
That movie follows the monomyth, exactly.
Yeah.
The bad thing about that is little kids watching that movie and memorizing it the same way we memorize The Lion King. When they're older and they learn the monomyth associated with Jesus, they realize, hey, Chloe is Jesus. Because it follows every single one of the, and by the way, all religious narratives follow the monomyth as well, right? Death of the god, right? So Chloe resurrects, right? Remember, she lunges at El Diablo, the devil, right? The Doberman, right? And saves her friend. She sacrifices her life for her friends, right? Harry, right? Has to save himself, right? Save his friends. Goes to
Lion, the Witch,
Voldemort.
and the Wardrobe? What?
Pattern? Are we looking at a narrative pattern here? Yes,
Wait,
I think we
Frodo?
are.
Even Frodo did that?
Sure.
I'm gonna go home and cry. Thanks.
I didn't mean to make people cry.
Mm-hmm.
But to catch on that if you want a popular narrative, follow the monomyth. Notice that all the movies you like probably already do follow the monomyth. I asked my daughter just the other day, what stories don't follow the monomyth? And we couldn't think of any. Be interesting.
There are some storylines. I mean, I think there's almost like an expectation that we have that a story is going to follow a certain circle, and there are a good amount of stories where you're getting to the end and somebody like directors, I think writers will do this just to kind of get a rise out of the audience. Like it's coming to the end, everything's good. Somebody comes up, blows the brains out of the hero, and the villain laughs and walks away, and everyone's going, no, what? He's gonna come back, right? And he doesn't, and the credits roll.
Well, the Greek narratives did not. So tragedy, Aristotle says a tragedy, the plot to a tragedy is the hero does everything right, but he still gets screwed in the end. Right? The comedy plot, on the other hand, the main character, you wouldn't call him a hero, does everything wrong and is still successful, which is hilarious, right?
Was that the dynamic comedy? Am I thinking that correctly?
Well, the classic one that I think of is Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther.
I got you.
You know, where, you know, what, in the scene where they're all trying to kill him because he's, he's, you know, so successful, yet he's such an idiot, right? You know, and so they try to kill him, and they end up all killing themselves, right? And he's not even aware that it happens, right? You know, he drops the toilet paper, bends down to pick up the toilet paper, and the two shoot one another, you know, in the side stalls, you know. That, I mean, that's hilarious. As he still gets his man, and yet he hasn't done anything right through the whole thing, you know. So that's hilarious. And if you think about, you know, the Greek tragedy, it's sad because that's the human dilemma. That's why people are supposed to go to the theater and all suffer through this tragedy together, because we cry together. Because for the Greeks, the human situation was miserable. We just have to be able to deal with it. Together, we stand together and realize we're all going to die, we're all going to get sick, our kids are going to die, you know, the crops will fail, enemy will kill us. You know, this stuff is going to happen. There doesn't seem to be any way to avoid it. So we just kind of suffer together through the tragic experiences. And in a sense, I think the comedies were meant, you know, the trouble was we lost Aristotle's book on comedy. You know, that got lost. But you get the sense that, in a sense, the comedy does the same thing, because in a sense, when things are really miserable, sometimes it helps to just laugh. Does that make sense? Humor is a good way to deal with the tragic. Well, so what I'm suggesting is keep in mind that it's easier to remember things if you could put them into a narrative format. We are starting to change some of our courses to fit this. I've seen a lot of books, like in math, that are using a narrative format to introduce the math concepts instead of the way we traditionally have done it. So that, I think, makes sense.
Jane has 2 seashells. She gives away 1.
Yeah. Well, those are word puzzles. Yeah, that people hate. But okay. The first test is an essay test. It's already there. Your answers cannot be wrong. They're all point of view questions. So I'm just looking for you to deal with the vocabulary and send me at least 900 words on the various questions you pick. Second one is Aristotelian syllogisms, which we will go over so that you'll realize that's maybe a little confusing to get into, but once you realize how mathematical our language is, that actually you could do that pretty easily. Just remember the patterns and you'll have no trouble with it. Then the third test will be symbolic logic. We'll go over the rules and things of that sort. The tests will be open book. And occasionally I've even allowed open conversation, but I don't know that that's really very good. People like it, but what I generally notice is that the people that don't know what they're doing all cluster together and give me the same wrong answers.
That's interesting.
So I'm not sure that really helps. The folks that know what they're doing want to sit quietly and do it. The other people is, well, can we sit together? Because I don't know what I'm doing, So They all get the wrong answers. So, but then the fourth test, the last one, you email me again, and it's again essays, and so there's some things from the very final chapters in that. Hopefully we'll get through the book. 10 weeks, that's not very long. But, okay. There's lots of interesting logic-related sites. I don't know if you're interested in G.K. Chesterton. You've ever heard of him? He's pretty interesting. Jabberwock. What's interesting about the Jabberwock and Lewis Carroll? Anybody? Remember how many of you know the Jabberwock? 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the momraths outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the claws that catch, the jaws that bite. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the Frumnia's Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought, and so he stood. I know it, but hey, let's have the real pros do it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, one of Lewis Carroll's most beloved poems.
Make this a good intro, Chief. This scene needs all the help it